Thanks, Charles, for having me, and thank you for everybody for sticking around, actually, this late. I'm actually happy about this panel. Number one, it's the last one, so I get to have a beer afterwards. Number two, it's actually full of a lot of people that can help monetize your game if you're developing one. Could we actually get raise your hand if you're developing a game or a virtual world again? All right, it's cleared out a bit. No, there's still enough people. And how many of you are using different payment systems, or are you there yet? Okay, some people to talk to you guys afterwards. So essentially, we have a lot of people here who are doing a lot of interesting things with, for Habbo, actually, we've had a lot of success over our 8-year history in choosing different aggregators within different markets, looking at levels of fraud, how we're monetizing our website, those kind of things. We've really noticed that it's really important to have a good relationship with your payment partner. So far, I believe we've done about 160, we actually have had, or more than that, about 170 companies we're directly connected with, so we kind of have a global payment network of our own. But the one thing I'd first like to do is have everybody introduce themselves to you, and just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and also how your company differentiates itself, because we've heard today that there's a lot of virtual worlds out there, and with those virtual worlds, there's a lot of payment partners now. So yeah, let's start there. Chris.
Thank you, everybody, for being here on a Friday afternoon. My name's DeBaun. I'm the Director of Business Development at PayByCash. I used to fulfill a strictly sales and marketing role there for about 3 years, but now I'm managing our first prepaid card product, gaming card product called the Ultimate Game Card. So,
good afternoon. I'm David Marcus, and I'm the founder and CEO of Echovox, the company behind the mobile payments platform called Zong. And what we do is mobile payments for social games, apps on Facebook, MySpace, and all the social networks, and we really focus on converting and getting the best conversion out of visitors into buyers, basically.
And my name is Tim Pechmann. I'm the president of GMG Entertainment. We do branded online game cards at retail. Prior to joining GMG, I was the head of digital entertainment for Target, and I launched my team and I launched the iTunes card exclusively in the world, and then we launched the Nexon card, which has been very successful in a number of the cards that you see in the market today. And we now work with a number of different online entertainment properties to bring the sales and brand building benefits of a branded prepaid card to major retailers across the country.
I'm Gene Hoffman. I'm Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Vindicia. We are a billing and fraud management as well as chargeback management service provider for intangible goods and services. Prior to Vindicia, I was the co-founder of emusic.com, and I like to say that we learned how to do payment commerce while we were selling water and Napster was giving beer away for free. We got very good at it, and we have customers such as Norton Antivirus. We rebill and recurring bill all of the Norton products globally in all payment methods and all payment types, all languages. We also fight all the chargebacks for World of Warcraft, are back-ending the launches of the Fire Sky, Stargate Worlds MMO, Cryptic Star Trek MMO, IMVU and Outspark are both also customers. So we have a little bit of experience in how to actually get paid selling intangible goods and services.
Hi everyone, my name is Lex Bayer. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Spirit Change Payments. And we're the first and leading payment system designed specifically for social networks. We really started with a clean slate and said, what do developers really want to be able to monetize their apps effectively on the social networks? And then we went ahead and built that. And some of the key features around that, and hopefully we'll discuss some of these during the panel, relates to both microtransactions and also one-click kind of seamless payments. So just to put it out there, our big, bold ambition is to become the universal payment platform for the social networks. We feel that both the users and the developers are looking for a universal solution, and we aspire to be that.
Okay, great, thank you. For each panelist, I'm really curious as to the minimum number of users that an app or a game would have to have before you look at them seriously. It's interesting because retail obviously might require more than a smaller application that's organically growing. So I just wanted any of you who have any criteria that you look at when you do pick a game that you're going to work with, specifically around the number of users.
So on that, it's sort of interesting. We've spent a lot of time looking at that, and what we found is it's not necessarily the number of users. In fact, we have a number of partners of ours have much bigger users than even Nexon did when we launched their card, but it's definitely about the number of hardcore users you have, the commitment level of those users, and what there is able to purchase on the site, or the desirability of those items on the site. On the other hand, we have a number of retail partners who are very interested in partnering with different sites that are in the growing stage, and their ability to integrate their brand in some way with those sites, and so they're willing to take a site that has much lower level of user base, but has potential to grow and has potential to build their brand at the same time as building the retailer's brand, to connecting with different demographics that they want to talk to. So it really does vary depending on what the retailer is interested in and what is available for sale.
And specifically with retailers, and prepaid cards, I guess. What if you do have obviously a number of users and a large number of users, and then as we all know, we have a paying user base. How does a retailer see, or are there questions around that? How big the paying user base is? Are they going to come to my store? Are they actually going to? And is there a lot of impulse buying going on? Obviously there is, but it's a higher price point, as we've noted. Yeah. We haven't talked about that, but we will. But it's a higher price point than microtransactions, for example.
Right. It's like a 7-part question there, Paul.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
To answer the first question, the retailers really don't know at this point. I mean, online gaming, some of the retailers were buying, the buyers that we talked to were buying food 6 months before. I mean, this is generally a new category for them. Even if they were buying traditional box product games, the online game piece is somewhat new to them. So, they look to us for a lot of the guidance on that. In terms of the price points, the challenge at retail is the shelf space is valuable. So while the benefit of the prepaid card is fantastic for them because it's got no carrying costs, no inventory, no markdown liabilities, et cetera, the challenge is they're still giving up their valuable shelf space. Mm. And depending on the retailer and the margin rates that the general contribution rate, grocery being maybe a little lower, a Target being a little higher, the shelf space has a certain value to it. So for them, they're not necessarily interested in doing a $5 or $3 or $2 card to closely match the transaction amounts on site. We have had tremendous success. In fact, one of our partners, the $50 card is doing 80% of the sales, and the $20 to high card is doing 20. So they've been able to realize a much higher dollar amount. And I think it's primarily because you get a nag factor with mom there with the kid, and mom is willing to spend a little bit more in a case like that for a gift or for a graduation or for a holiday or for something like that. A gift-giving price point tends to be a little higher than like a $5. So.
Okay. Well, let me talk about. Oh, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, to the general point about price points, I actually see a lot of fear driving lower price points from various games and various offers, in a sense that, and I think it was touched on a little bit earlier today, but the point being, I think people should be less shy to ask customers for higher dollars per. I mean, people have kind of looked out in the world and said, well, Warcraft can only get $12 per month, and I'm no Warcraft, and therefore I can't even try for $12 a month. Well, the reality is you'll be perceived based on your own price point. And there's an old software story about a word processor back in the pre-WordPerfect days when word processors were $1,500 a box, and they sold it for $49, and no one bought it because, of course, it must be crap, right? But when they upped the price to $250, it actually sold like hotcakes. Those are important components of, when you're talking about a completely virtual good and a completely virtual service, don't be afraid to try a much higher price point to start with. You can always come down.
Yeah, good point. Speaking of that, where obviously as virtual worlds, we have our active user base, and we're always looking at different ways to monetize that user base to increase our number of paying users. For each of you, then, what are some of the best practices in regards to doing that? Have you identified in each of your platforms, and how can you help virtual worlds work?
Well, I think for us, what we've seen is really that the games that are the most engaging and where the stickiness with the user has been really developed. It's it just converts well. Now, the best practice as far as payments concerned is really for us around having the least level of friction possible during the payment phase. it's an impulse buy, as you rightly said so. And so people are not likely to use a credit card to buy a $3 virtual sombrero on Facebook, right? And typing in their cell phone number, getting a PIN code, and just typing it back just for a small transaction is probably the least friction-oriented system you can find, and no registration whatsoever as well. So it's a combination of how engaging the game can be and how effective your payment system is.
Yeah, just to add to that and touch on an earlier point, we haven't found, at least on the social networks, that the size of the game correlates to how well developers can monetize it. It's really around engagement and how addicted essentially the users are to playing these games. And some best practices we've seen just across the board is that these games kind of usually have some key elements, and you've heard this through some of the conference today. But collection of items is something that I think really appeals to a lot of users, especially maybe the feminine psyche. People want to collect things and show off to their friends their status of how well they've been able to collect them. And the second kind of best practice that really helps these apps monetize relates to competition. And this maybe falls more in the masculine psyche, but really getting users to compete against each other and see how they can better each other. Again, related to the status that's often inferred on the social networks.
One of the things I see kind of not thought about well often is when you're kind of using the freemium model to generally build customer base, people aren't necessarily thinking through the next step of how to price discriminate once you've found your customers. So the way you can often do that, either you start doing discounts for bulk pre-purchases, which changes the dynamics of that transaction. This is a customer you've already gotten. He's bought one thing from you. The other thing is, subscription re-enters in freemium in small ways. In other words, if your core business strategy is to go after individual items, it's still a very strong business strategy. But to the extent that you can take your best customers and put them in a much higher subscription service of some sort or auto-recur service, what you do also is you change your denominator for chargeback management. So all of a sudden you get to take more fraud risk on the front end for your individual goods to acquire customers, because you've now got a small base of ongoing recurring billing from customers you're not likely to have chargebacks from.
Yeah.
One thing for us from helping our partners, generate new users and monetize new users in that respect is what we try to do is mimic the cycles at retail and allow our online partners to tap into the massive peaks that occur during the fourth quarter with holiday, with graduation, Father's Day. The summer peak is almost identical to the Christmas peak in terms of kids being out of school, going with mom to Target, whatever it might be, and nagging mom for the card. So we've tried to line up a lot of things that coincide with that to capitalize on. So for instance, a number of our partners right now are doing teaser campaigns or email blasts that encourage their users, specifically the users that have never bought anything, to add a prepaid card that's available at Best Buy onto their Christmas list. So it's capitalizing on those things that retailers have done well for years and bringing it into the online space and promoting it that way. So you're taking users who've never spent money and encouraging them to add this as a gift idea during the fourth quarter. So one of the things that we've seen.
Yeah.
I'll add one thing, and I think that's important, is reaching out to your international customers. Even if you're a North American developer and you're expecting North American customers, you're inevitably going to have a few customers that land on that site, whether it's free to play or whatever type of business model that you've got, that want to taste that game, and they're reluctant to use a credit card, or they don't have a credit card. We've found that the heart and soul of our business has really been what happens when that 14-year-old kid in Turkey who's got 20 euros burning a hole in his wallet, he's got no way to spend that money. So you want to try and look for some alternate payment types that are out there, work with an alternate payment provider so that you can bring those customers in, because honestly their money is as good as anybody else's. And there are some booming economies in the world right now, both in Russia and China, and it's not easy for those customers to pay for your game. So.
Cool, I'm glad you brought up the international market, and I wanted to ask either any of you or each of you, how does the payment landscape differ between the US, Europe, and Asia? Obviously, I could answer the question to a little degree, but I want to hear what you guys have to say about that.
Well, the short answer, of course, is credit card penetration. Yeah. I mean, that is the first piece. The second piece, obviously, then, to what extent does SMS now drive it, and then also what do the models work? I mean, one of the things I often see people really miss is missing the cultural differences of how you market. I mean, the great example of this is, if you're selling toothpaste to an American, you tell them that your breath will smell fresher. You sell toothpaste to an Asian, you tell them that your friends and family will enjoy your breath better. Right? You have to think through those issues even at the payment level, because you're selling something different fundamentally to who you're trying to reach to. So it's both the marketing aspect as well as then how the penetration works and what the expected sociology is of how people would pay for it. You know, here in North America, subscription works better in some ways because, well, that's kind of how we all like to go. We like to worry less about the risk that we got taken advantage of by being one-offed on nickel and dimed items, right? Where that's not the truth in any other major region.
No, I think, and to add to that, definitely mobile plays a big role in international. What we're seeing with our publisher, and we're probably now through partners or directly on, let's say, about 100 different apps, be it on Facebook or off Facebook. And what we're seeing is that probably 60% of that traffic comes from international. And there, it's even more difficult to monetize through advertising because you don't have advertisers who are willing to pay for that type of traffic, or it's pretty difficult to sell. So mobile, especially in the countries where you have a lower credit card penetration, is very, very efficient, and we convert extremely well in these countries.
Do you think that's also because well, what are the differences? I mean, especially with the US, and I mean, if you look at the Nordics, for example, and the proliferation of cell phones and how easy they are to use, and also for the game developer, the commission rates, big difference.
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely, I mean, we work with carriers for payments, and I mean, definitely the commission rate that the US carriers are taking compared with the Nordics or even the UK is much higher. So the cost of a transaction is actually higher in the US than it is in Europe, for instance. And now as far as usage patterns, we see that now the US is kind of catching up in terms of the number of transactions on mobile. It's true that in some of the Nordic countries, mobile penetration is over 100%. Yeah. You know? So it means people have multiple phones, right? And we're not there yet in the US, but if you look at the text messaging take up in the US, I think that within the next 2 years, we'll catch up.
Yeah.
One thing that we run into a lot when we see folks rolling out internationally, and they've been primarily North American focused, we make a lot of assumptions about how the payment mechanism works from a rules point of view. And what I mean by that is on time. So you're used to going, I got the payment method, I tried it, it worked, we're done. Well, you go to Brazil and okay, there's great credit card penetration, but Banco Bolero, you put the transaction through and you hope the person goes down to their bank and actually hands them the form signed. So you have to think through whether or not you're going to grant people access to the game during the interim. Did they get access to the actual content they bought? Are you willing to take it away from them, especially then if they've resold it? Yeah. Right. So it really challenges some business rules that often aren't really thought through when you think about those other payment methods.
Speaking of that, you all come from different, you all have different payment systems in a way. If I am, trying to monetize my virtual world in my game, what is the best payment mix? I mean, we can all talk about, how each of them might be complementary. So I might get a customer who first uses their mobile phone and then starts buying prepaid cards. Is there any thoughts around that?
Yeah, well, I think anyone in the payment industry knows that the more options you give the users, the more they will purchase, because different users have different preference. And so we are in many ways complementary. But what I would argue as well is that, at least what we've seen, is that microtransactions are a great way with virtual goods. And the reason is when you put a $10 or a $50 upfront fee in front of a user, a lot of users are going to balk at that. And having a really small transaction like $1 really promotes sampling. So a user will say, hey, I'll try that. And they try it and they have a great experience. And then they say, I'll try it again. And so within a few months, you realize you've taken much more than that $10 that they initially would have said no to. And as they get more and more comfortable with the systems, they'll end up spending more money and taking larger payments. So this sampling culture or initial micropayments is a great way to lead to larger payments down the road.
Well, I think you also, though, need to be a little sophisticated. So in other words, I think you need to support all the payment methods, but you want to try to start doing things like A/B testing, how you present payment methods. They're as much a part of your flow to customer acquisition as anything else. And then doing things like using GeoIP to say, well, gee, I don't need to offer a Brazilian payment method to someone from Europe, right? The extent you can simplify the buy process, this comes back to the ease of purchase. You want to, in the background, support everything in a sense, but in the foreground, when you're dealing with that customer, dynamically saying, look, this is what I know about both that ad campaign that brought that customer to me and his likely preferred currency. I mean, that's a big issue. A lot of people completely skip the fact that, you know, you really do want to actually offer your product in their local currency if you can, right? And then present them then with the you know, the concise mix of currency support for that, you know, mix of ad campaign, customer location, language, right?
That's interesting, because I was wondering also then the CRM strategies for a lot of your clients. I mean, it's so important to recognize how my customer's buying, how, you know, how frequently they like to buy. What I do find with maybe a lot of virtual worlds, not Habbo, obviously, is that, you know, there's a big demand to get a lot of users, and then just basically monetize as many of them as you can to meet your you know, whatever budgets or whatever have you, but maybe not thinking the whole process through. What do your companies do differently in regards to that, or when you're advising virtual world clients? Any of you?
Well, I think I'm a little different than everybody else here, because my job is to make sure these guys work together with you.
Yeah.
Right? And so from our perspective, I'm very interested in making sure that you can do things like A/B test, and you can then play with what your pricing for product is, what your pricing for subscription is. You know, a lot of people forget the fact that not every customer has to be shown the same price for the same object, right? And it's actually not all that hard to do that differently. When you start playing with that, you start going, okay, does the price really change my look to book, or does the price really change my customer life total, right? And so once you start managing it that way, you know, you're asking a lot more out of your billing infrastructure, and by the way, all of a sudden you went from game developer to a billing developer. Yeah. So don't do that, call me. But my point being that when you analyze the metrics that way, and you also start looking at even past the transaction, a lot of people stop at the transaction, but you haven't even thought through chargeback. And one of my favorite stories is, you know, we'll sign up an online virtual goods company who shall remain nameless, where they had an affiliate campaign, and their number 2 affiliate by total goods sold was excellent. So they kept spending more money and more money, but pardon me, it was number 8 affiliate, but it was their number 1 by chargeback, to the point where they were losing half the dollars they thought they were making in chargebacks. Turn the 1 affiliate off, chargeback rate falls to the floor, and they can spend all that marketing dollars with other folks, right? Those are the ways you have to kind of track that to really figure out whether you're fooling yourself about what your customer acquisition was that a good customer or not?
Yeah.
My advice to all of you out there would be, if you're developing a game, do your billing early. Do not wait until the 11th hour. In fact, we were kind of laughing outside, saying maybe for next year we'll have a topic that's a little bit sexier, like billing nightmares, because we've all seen them in one form or another. Huge train wrecks at the 11th hour because the billing was stitched in the last week or two. You spent all this effort working on this great product that you want your customers to love, and when they want to reward you for it and it doesn't work, it can be pretty disappointing. I would say work with your bank, set up your merchant account, set up your PayPal account, look for the alternate payment providers that you want to target the regions of the world that you're after, whether it's Wally Card, UCash, Global Collect, Payment One, BSG Clearing, any of the other folks at this table. Find out which customers you want to go after and put your billing in sooner than later, and test it, make sure it works.
Yeah, just a question, Paul. I'm sorry, I'm kind of stealing your moderator role here, but what's your experience on Habbo as far as payments go, and what works best?
Yeah, I mean, I think the philosophy of the company at the beginning was to offer as many payment options as possible, and obviously it's free to play, and the microtransaction model, getting the user interested, keeping them on the site, really making good user experience, and then, you know, basically selling them on maybe an introduction piece of furniture, or Fernie as we call it. With that, you know, allowing them to stay in the environment and have the brand status, and then, you know, eventually, as we've moved into offline payment methods like prepaid cards, really try to grow the brand at retail. So in the US, I would say, you know, at least, you know, I can talk for our competitors. It's interesting because we've had so many experiences in so many different markets, and we are from Europe, obviously. So mobile's always been big, and so when we launched in the US, we launched with mobile. But we've noticed is a lot of our competitors are only using maybe credit card and prepaid card. Commission issues, yes, if you want to be a profitable company. And I don't know, you know, if we should go into the commissions, but maybe I can get that out of you guys after a few drinks. No, but you know, that I think that having that payment method has been actually very helpful, because with mobile you can bill with very small increments and keep doing that. Brings me to a point actually with fraud. So I just wanted to hear from each of you, you know, how fraud is detected across your systems, and what's the impact of it? How, what kind of percentages are we looking at across each of the methods?
Sure, well, I'll start. There are some really interesting things that you can do with fraud on social networks, and there are two types of fraud I'd like to talk about. One is kind of friendly fraud, if that's an okay term, and the other is more sinister fraud. So sinister fraud relates to people really trying to game the system, and they've got fake credit card numbers, and they're out there to make as much money as they can by duping your system. And one thing that's powerful with the social graph, which is something we utilize heavily in our fraud management systems, is that it can help you keep some of the sinister fraud out. And to use some basic examples, if you're generating a fake profile to go and try and commit fraud, you can detect that because typically a user with a fake profile doesn't have a lot of friends and deep connections. And taking this to a further level, these social graphs are all interconnected. So you can look at a social graph of a particular user and see that they are associated with people who have committed fraud, and so it's more likely that they'll commit fraud too. Conversely, if people are associated with people who are making legitimate purchases, it's more likely to be a real profile and people making legitimate purchases. So tapping into the social graph for us has been something that's been really powerful in dealing with fraud, and as we all know on this panel, virtual goods has a very high fraud component. Then just touching on the friendly fraud component. So friendly fraud sort of relates to users who have buyer's remorse. They purchase something and it helps them level up, and then they're done with it. So they'd love to return that. Or they point to someone else and say, hey, I wasn't using my profile at that time. And so something else that we've implemented, which has really helped with a lot of this friendly fraud, is that we assign each user a score. And the score is related to how many purchases they're making and what amounts and how many refunds they're doing. And we pass the score on to the developers. So every time the developer decides to make a transaction, they look at the score and decide if they want to do business with this person. And this has been tremendously effective for us. Refunds are a teeny amount of our business. And it's actually worked so well that we had to institute an unrefund button because users would do this buyer's remorse thing. They would see that they're no longer able to purchase their coins or virtual currency, and so they'd come back to us to try and rectify the situation.
So there's a couple things I'd like to point out about fraud. We do a lot of fraud management. First of all, fight your chargebacks. In your chargebacks are data that you do not expect about your customers. Until you actually dig through them in a rigorous manner, you won't know exactly why you have them. You'll think you know, but you don't until you've looked at them. That said, most of the tools you'll see out there to help combat fraud were very much built with a different business model in mind. It was built with a high underlying cost of goods model. So it was, selling plasma TVs at buy.com. The problem with this is, in most models where there isn't residual value, cash out, et cetera, you're actually hurting yourself by being overly false positive. You've turned a customer away that would otherwise have had a longer customer life and been valuable to you. So you've got to be very careful about that. And in fact, what ends up occurring is, if you think about it, your chargeback budget, and you've got about 1% every month to spend in a sense, is actually how aggressive you can be on customer acquisition and customer retention. If you can take out only the chargebacks that you know are bad and are true fraud, sinister fraud, however you like to put it, then you have the opportunity to be that much more aggressive on making it a little harder to opt out, being a little bit more aggressive about your marketing message on the front end. One of the most important things, though, is a lot of folks in the intangible goods world say, okay, there's no value out for my service. I don't need any fraud screening at all. And so you get inadvertently whopped up into a Romanian credit card sting. The way this works is, if you have a negative option free trial or a very low dollar transaction, you're a card test. So what happens here is somebody goes, okay, I bought a list of 10,000 credit cards. I'm going to take the signature Platinum Visa, try it on your site because the 99-cent transaction is not likely to be seen. If it works, the card's still valid. I'll print a card, I'll hand it to this guy, they'll go to Amazon and steal something real. So you get a chargeback, and they're not really even trying to defraud you. They're just using you to test if the card's still valid. So you have to have at least some layer of making sure that you've got kind of core infrastructure check of, does the card match the IP, does the card generally not on a blacklist, all those other pieces that you want to do. So you do have to watch it even if you think you have no risk.
Yeah.
So from a fraud perspective, the prepaid card is obviously, you don't have to deal with the credit card fraud issue, right? Or if there is credit card fraud, the retailer has to deal with it because somebody used a fraudulent credit card to buy the card. It's not your issue. The nice thing is somebody buys a prepaid card for one of your brands at a retailer, you get the money right away. It gets sent to you whether they redeem that card ever or not. So that's a nice benefit there. and then they redeem the PIN code online, and it's a one-time redeem, and that PIN code's no longer valid after that. So you do cut down on the credit card fraud piece there in that regard, which is nice.
Yeah, same here for mobile. I think we're seeing mostly friendly fraud, and the way we avoid that is basically by looking at specific patterns of if a cell phone starts buying a gazillion dollars of virtual currency in a 5 minutes period, we don't let it happen basically. Mm-hmm. So we analyze the patterns and the transactions, and we have a fraud prevention system built in.
Oh.
Yeah, I'd echo everything all these other gentlemen have said. Having fraud scrubbing in place is really important. What Lex said about having a system that builds a circle of trust, or working with a company like Gene's company, my company offers a solution, is really important. Because if you're offering something besides credit cards, PayPal, you can get yourself into a lot of problems with PayPal with chargebacks and fraud. In fact, you can end up in what's called the PayPal penalty box with a lot of money sitting in that account that you can't touch for 6 months. So definitely, fraud scrubbing is something every merchant should have.
So I have a question. When you use the prepaid card model, who's on the hook for the state requirement that the funds are actually redeemed? I've always wondered that.
So
does everybody know what I'm talking about? So quickly, in state laws, if you buy a gift certificate and never redeem it, the money actually supposedly reverts to the state, believe it or not, in most states.
So the transferred value card that we are, it's actually the product is sold at retail, in the state it's sold, they collect the tax for it, and the transaction's done. They come and redeem that card online, but there's not a bank holding the dollars behind that has to be accounted for. It's already a transaction that was completed at that time.
Oh, okay. Actually, I wanted to get back to that 1%. I mean, there's markets like Eastern Europe where a lot of companies have to IP block the whole country. And I'm wondering what can be done to try to at least launch a product and monetize those users, or is it just a lost cause, with your risk management settings and any other things that you're going to do?
Well, if you're actively managing chargebacks, then you do have the ability to at least test. And so if you've built an environment where you can A/B test your platform anyway, A/B testing those situations, saying, okay, I'm going to let every other Malaysian transaction through today.
Yeah.
And then watch it for approximately, it's about a 15-day cycle. So worst case, 7 to 15 days later, you'll see whether those were true or friendly.
Yeah.
That's often the best way to manage that. And again, that really requires you, though, to be really watching those chargebacks, electronically grabbing them, and saying, okay, to what extent can I go forward or backwards? The tools here are the usual tools you have. And the problem has become that block is not really effective anymore. Because with the rise of botnets, people just take the card information that they're really trying to steal from you, figure out that, okay, this one's in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Let me find a bot that's GeoIP information, goes back to Pennsylvania. I'll use that as a pair, and you won't know that it's a Malaysian transaction.
Okay,
right?
Makes sense.
Mobile as well is a nice way of doing that. I mean, avoiding fraud in these countries, because it's pretty difficult for fraudster to do that at a large scale. I mean, they need to buy thousands of different SIM cards and handsets to do it. So it becomes pretty much difficult.
Makes sense.
Or accordingly, you can pick payment types for that country that the customers feel comfortable and familiar with. In Russia, people are so used to having their credit cards declined or not even offered on the point of sale, that if you can offer something like Yandex or RuPay, which they are comfortable and familiar with, they'll be like, oh, great, somebody will take my money. So,
yeah, very important point. When I was saying doing A/B test, when you say no, don't say no. Say use one of these gentlemen.
There was a point on a panel earlier today where they were talking about people really coming in and looking at virtual economies, and and then there was one in regards to with algorithms and lots of technical things in the buying process. And then there was another point made about, sorry, I'm tired a little bit. Another point was made about it being more of a merchandising kind of mindset. The closest thing to that obviously would be prepaid cards. And one of the questions that I had for Chris and Tim, you guys both you have a card that I guess is, you can talk about that a little bit more. It's a little bit different than a prepaid card, but it's kind of the same principles. It's sold in a store, those kind of things. And then Tim obviously works solely prepaid cards. Do developers now have to start thinking about retail in a big way in regards, and what does that mean for marketing budgets and end caps and the cost that it goes to associate with the good?
Well, I don't think they have to, but there's certainly a benefit to it. I mean, there's a massive benefit to extending your brand reach offline into a physical environment, right? So the prepaid card is the ultimate idea because it's a 3-inch by 5-inch billboard for your brand, and it's actually a marketing tool that actually generates revenue. So sitting on there on the shelf in a Target or a Best Buy or a Walmart, first of all, it can generate awareness for you, it can generate revenue for you, and then lastly, you can get a sort of a stamp of approval, if you will, by those big box retailers carrying that because of the sort of trust transference people have, whether it's a mom at Target or a dad at Best Buy saying, well, this is probably a pretty decent website, I'm going to let my kid go and transact there. Whether they even buy a card or not, you've created some more awareness for your site and maybe some more trust for it that the parents are okay giving their credit card now to the kid to go online and play. So I think it's definitely something to consider because the opportunity, these retailers, the big box retailers are nothing more than just big marketing firms. They're big marketing machines, if you will, for products. And so tapping into that can extend your brand well beyond just the online environment.
One important thing to think about, which is tangentially related, but is a critical and dangerous thing most people are ignoring, is sales tax. So everyone thinks here that an intangible good doesn't have sales tax due on it. Well, as long as you don't have nexus in Washington State or Texas, you're probably right, right? But if you sold something that might be considered software because it possibly execute, you actually owe taxes in New York, right? And collecting and calculating that, if you didn't collect and calculate, they'll come back and get it from you. So this is an important issue. In fact, what reminded me of this is that if people buy and retail the card, they should pay, in some states they pay sales tax at point of presence. For example, in Texas they do not. So in fact, you can buy one of their cards if correctly sold, but who knows whether Target's doing exactly right, without sales tax applied. The sales tax is due upon redemption for Texas residents, if you have Texas Nexus. Hard stuff if you haven't been aware of it.
Did you have something to add about?
Yeah, I'll echo what Tim said. Having a prepaid card is an excellent financial instrument to get your customers into the game, specifically if you're going after teens and tweens, because mom and dad may not be willing to cough up the credit card or a check or some other payment, and if that kid's got allowance money and he can dash down to a local retailer to pick up that card, he'll be back in your product in the amount of time it takes him to get to that store and back. So it really is a good way, and it limits the child's payment to whatever it's going to be on the face value of that card. So I would say in terms of something for that specific demographic, it's great, and I would highly recommend it.
Speaking of prepaid cards, I think we were talking about this, but the price points seem to be $10, $15, $25. Do you think there'll ever be a point where it will be an impulse purchase, like a piece of gum, like the microtransaction right next to the aisle on the way out the door? Is the category just kind of being established now at retail, and what can companies do to differentiate themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're a little past being established, but we're still in the early stage of it. No doubt. A lot of these retailers are still educating their consumers on this as a category. In fact, a lot of retailers are getting educated. But absolutely, it can become an impulse, sort of purchase. So that's if you can tap into some of the marketing potential at a retailer, some point of purchase displays, some in-store TV monitors, things like that, and you can tell a great little story in that time or on that visual display, then absolutely become an impulse purchase. I mean, tricks or Lucky Charms is a great impulse purchase because the kid sees the box and nags mom for it, and they pick it up right there. So if you can create the same sort of brand excitement either through tapping into the creative on the card or the creative tools that are available at a retailer to market it, message it in store, then absolutely you can create an impulse purchase. I'm not going to say someone's going to buy a $50 card for a hardcore MMO they've never heard of right there, but I think we're moving in a place with definitely a lot of the virtual worlds that are here today where you've got a great story to tell in a fun environment, a great entertainment pastime for the kid, if it might be that case, that if you can tell that story in the retail environment, absolutely you can get impulse purchase.
Yeah, although the margins disappear, of course, when you go too low. There's a cost to put these cards up in the store and print them, and the retailers need to take their cut. So the cheapest real prepaid cards that I've seen out there go down to about $5, and I think any point under that doesn't make much sense. Just to sort of throw out a different perspective on the prepaid cards, the prepaid cards work really well for young users or users who don't have credit cards. But something that's often overlooked is actually monetizing people who do have credit cards, and the US economy is a very credit card-centric society, also presents challenges. So if someone's shopping at Target and they've spent 20 minutes figuring out which pot they want to purchase, and they've read all the specifications and how these things are made. When it comes to a 3-minute payment process, they're fine spending that time filling out all their credit card information, their 16 digits, their zip code. But when you're trying to monetize virtual goods, the gamers really just care about playing the game. They're immersed in this environment, and when they come across a purchase decision, they're really buying something so that they can take it and go and use it immediately. So anything you can do to really remove the friction related to taking in payments through credit cards really helps these users make more frequent purchases.
Okay.
Yeah. I just want to, first of all, agree with that, and also say that what we've seen generally is that if people have the choice of using either credit card in its normal way, not like Spare Change does it, or PayPal or mobile, what we're seeing is that after they've tried it, about 82% of the people end up using mobile to pay, because it's just faster and they want to get back to their game and play and get their new virtual weapon to defeat their opponent or whatever, but they want to get back to it in like a couple of seconds.
Yeah, makes sense. I guess we'll just do 2 more and then we'll turn it over to the audience. But real quick, just real quick, do any of your companies offer more services outside? I mean, it seems as though, putting in a back-end solution is one thing, but what about really helping, developers like us really look at our website, look at the touch points, look at the user experience, and where we should be putting the payment information, that kind of thing. It's intuitive and it should happen at our level, but sometimes you overlook it because you're so entrenched in your own business.
Yeah, I think we offer a couple things that I'll just point out, and these are just great analytical tools for our developers to try and help them understand what's selling well, and great reporting. But there are some other things that one can use in systems to really help developers. So what's unique about our system is we've collected a network of paying users on the social networks, and as we've heard throughout the panels today, it's only a fraction of actual users who land up making purchases, let's say 10%. So if you collect these, you can then share them amongst the different developers in the different games. So in that way, you can actually help these other developers grow their business and monetize them by sharing the users who are comfortable making these payments across the platforms. And then one last thing just to throw in is customer support. And just want to really emphasize that when you take payments from people, it becomes serious business. And even if it's a $1 transaction, when someone gives you real money for that, if they don't get what they want or it didn't happen quickly enough, they'll call you up. And it doesn't matter if it's 3 a.m. or 5 a.m. When they're immersed in that game, they want their goods. So any systems that help the developers support customer service related to payments, which we all have to deal with, is also something else that can really help the developers.
So you thought you'd have to twist my arm to get my pricing out, and I'll use it for a reason.
Yeah.
We charge about 2% at scale.
Okay.
The reason we do that is because part of what our service is I expect to help you both figure out your messaging, understand whether those campaigns are working. We actually have, as part of our organization, a professional marketing services capability, quite intentionally, because fundamentally a lot of you folks are coming from focusing on games, as you well should be. And I mean, our background, we learned how to do direct marketing is what we're all really talking about.
Yeah.
Being able to take that and then also share a little bit internally in the sense of, well, this is working for another person like you should try it as well. And being able to then understand that there are other price points and other ways to potentially monetize or get out of a fraud problem by growing revenue. So being able to actually talk about both what landing pages look like, how to think about which payment methods to offer who and how, that's very particularly what we want to be able to do for our merchants.
Makes sense. Good. Oh.
I think for us specifically, the best thing we do for developers is allow you to continue to be developers and build the best experience possible. So, what we offer is a full service solution of doing everything soup to nuts, from the production, distribution, shipping, forecasting, planning, and placement, and promotion of the cards. So that's probably the best thing we do, is let you do what you do great, and we go do what we do. But from an industry standpoint, what we try to do is work with our partners, because we do get a lot of data back. Obviously, you guys have access to data as well, but we get the data back on what's selling where, how's it selling in relation to other competitors in the marketplace, various price points, things like that we can then feed back and hopefully help you guys make better decisions or change what you're doing and what you're charging or how you're messaging it on the site itself.
Yeah, same here. As far as Gene's concerned here, we're also having a user experience team in-house helping our developers basically just get the best user experience possible. So we go to the extent of actually creating mock-ups for our customers and helping them integrate mobile payments and with the best UI possible.
Right.
We're pretty close to being able to offer a turnkey solution, but we've never really done credit card billing. So essentially the heart and soul of PayByCash has been to open up business for you as a merchant to about 240 different countries, do 70 different payment types. We offer a standalone fraud scrubbing system, a prepaid card that's in about 16,000 retailers nationwide, so and we'll soon go international. So that's really what we've worked on. The company's continuing to grow. So.
Okay. And then lastly, just a yes or no, is the current economy going to affect free-to-play and virtual worlds and social networking sites?
Unclear.
Yes, but more limitedly than the rest of the world.
Yeah, but I think people will pull back and hopefully focus on sort of, I don't want to say cheaper, but relatively less expensive entertainment at home.
Yeah, agreed. I think people will definitely travel less and spend less on luxury brands, but just spend more on low-cost entertainment.
Okay.
I would say maybe a little bit. Online gaming's always been traditionally kind of recession-proof, but this is bigger than a recession, so.
All right, you can all talk to me afterwards to get my opinion. Any audience questions?
Will there be a universal prepayment card?
I'm sorry? Oh, will there ever be a universal prepaid card, is the question. Well, Chris has one actually that has...
All of our merchants have can use the prepaid card that we're offering right now as a payment type on their website, and we're actively working with our suite of merchants to continue adding them to that card, either as a co-branded facing to that product, or if they simply just want to accept that as a payment type. So, and it's been very, very successful for us.
Any others?
I don't think we'll see it in the U.S. I think the competition's going to be much too strong, and so you're going to see that there may be a dominant prepaid card, but I don't know there's going to be one even then.
Anyone else? Yep.
Can you guys talk a little bit about dealing with the currencies and different sorts of real life currencies and figuring out
You guys talk a little bit about taking virtual currencies and figuring out what the exchange rate should be for other real-life currencies and sort of balancing that mix as currencies float, and being a North American developer, we want to be paid in dollars and figuring all that out?
Well, first of all, you kind of have to make an internal decision about whether you want to collect in multiple currencies and take currency risk yourself, or whether you want to put that down at your bank. I generally recommend for North Americans initially to let that be at the bank level. So when you're selling a euro or a UK pound sterling transaction, it'll clear that night in dollars. The problem you'll run into is when you start doing chargebacks and such with currency float, you'll get a chargeback for a euro transaction. It's a different price than the price that you recorded internally for a dollar transaction. The best you can do in certain senses is, especially as you start out, to integrate a little bit of some of the software as a service currency tools, just so you get a feel for what that transaction probably looked like price-wise. I think it's going to be hard for any smaller developer to start thinking about really allowing currency transition, and then once you do, you get into a whole host of problems that PayPal got into around what's called money changer services. So there are real issues in the US and internationally about KYC, know your customer, and all sorts of stuff. So you want to try to generally keep it, if you came in pound sterling, you can only come back out in pound sterling, right? Longer term, you then change to actually starting to think about how you may even want to separate your business to a non-US subsidiary and a US subsidiary, but that's when you're at the $20 million level, right?
Was your question about foreign currency, or actually the exchange rate between whatever currency you're paying and your virtual currency?
Well, yeah, I mean, once you've...
So you have your own internal currency inside of your game or your virtual world, and you want to make sure that customers around the world get the same experience for that amount of value.
But as I said, the best thing you can do is generally pull in the software as a service exchange rate monitors, and then try to update your leaderboard of exchange rate in a sense on maybe a daily basis. And the nice thing is, other than the last few weeks, currencies generally don't move that quickly. Certainly in the last week, that's not a true statement, right?
All right. Any others? No? That's it. Yeah, well, thank you very much.